Okay, in this video we are going to discuss Amazon Aurora, and we're going to do a demo of autoscaling and how that works with Amazon Aurora. So just to start it off, Aurora is an Amazon technology. It's a database that that is created for the cloud. It's part of the RDS offering that Amazon has in their RDS service. And of course, they're trying to encourage people to use it, but of course, you can use other databases as well, such as MySQL, Postgres, MS SQL, Oracle, and MariaDB. So we're going to focus just on Aurora, and we're going to show how you can do auto scaling with it in a similar way to how you can do auto scaling for EC2 instances. I'm going to show you this diagram I found that's it's going to show you what we're going to do. We're going to create an Aurora DB cluster, and we're going to have one master instance here, and we're going to have multiple read replicas and other availability zones. And we'll show how the auto scaling policy can bring up more read replicas or down depending on what our scaling policy is. All right, and the next thing I'll show is just a little outline. So we're going to have all these steps. So we're going to create a security group for the MySQL cluster. We're going to create the cluster with a writer and a reader, and we're going to then scale it out up to 10, and then we're going to scale it back in to show how it automatically creates read replicas and deletes read replicas depending on our auto scaling policy. And then we're finally going to delete the Aurora cluster. All right, so with that out of the way, let's get started here. We're going to start with our security groups. We're going to create a security group to access the Aurora cluster, and we'll just say test RDS Aurora, and this will be a MySQL Aurora instance. So I'm going to just add the TCP rule for MySQL, which is right there, MySQL Aurora, which is port 3306. We'll just say for now we'll make it available from my IP, and we'll make the cluster publicly available. So we'll just create that. And now I'm just going to name it here so it becomes a little bit clearer, just like that. Okay, and now that we have our security group with the inbound rule, I am going to create the cluster. So if we go into our RDS dashboard, if we look at the DB, here's the dashboard. We'll show how there are no databases right now. So we're going to create the database. And here, this is where we can pick which database we want to create. So we can choose MySQL, Maria, Postgres, Oracle, or SQL Server. We're going to choose Amazon Aurora, and we're going to use the MySQL version of Amazon Aurora, which it already defaults to. This is a cool option. You can actually have it be globally replicated, so not just in one region, but it can actually automatically have replicas all around the world in other regions. We're going to just use the regional one now, and we're going to replicate the read replicas in the availability zone within a region. And then here, this is how it's going to work in terms of how many writers and how many readers. So the default is one writer and multiple readers, which is what I was showing right over here. So there's going to be one writer, which is the master, and there's going to be multiple reader replicas that will be replicated and we can read from. Okay, you can have other configurations as well, including serverless. For templates, we'll just select dev test. This is just a demo. For database, we'll just say test Aurora. And for the credential settings, we'll leave the password, we'll leave the username as admin, and the password we'll just make admin, admin, and admin, admin. Now, as far as the instance size, it defaults to an R5 large, We don't need that. This is just a demo, so we could even, you can select other ones here. You can go down to R4 large, or you can go up all the way right here, R5 24 extra large. But we can also include previous generations, so you can put it on a really small one, like a R3 large. Now, just to note, this is not on the free tier, so you can use the free tier for MySQL and for Postgres, but for Aurora there is no free tier. So that's why if you're going to try it, like you can try it with a relatively cheap instance size like this one, R3 large. So I'll just pick that. Okay, this is the part where I was talking about the availability in multiple availability zones. So multi-AZ deployment, if I click on that info, select create replica in different zones to have Amazon RDS maintain a synchronous standby replica in different availability zones. This is what I was talking about, and we'll just say yes to that. So if we do have multiple readers, it should put them into different availability zones. For connectivity, we'll just choose the default VPC for now. Obviously in production you would have your own VPC. And then here for additional connectivity, the subnet group will leave as the default. And we'll say it is publicly accessible. Normally you wouldn't do this, but for a demo we can say that. And as far as the security group, okay, this is the security group that we created. And there it is. We can delete the default one. And now we have that security group that allows us to access that port, the 3306 port for MySQL. And there it is. The database port is 3306. And we'll leave the authentication as password. You can have IAM database authentication as well, but we'll just leave the regular password authentication for now. And let's have additional configurations. So this is going to be the name of your DB instance. So we can call it, actually test Aurora instance 1 is fine. And the initial database name, we can just say test Aurora, it doesn't really matter. And the cluster, we can leave all that. The failover, we can have different failover priority, but we'll just leave it as no preference. Oh, right, I used a dash. I should have just used an underscore like that. There. And the backup, we can leave the backup default as is. We can enable encryption. I'll just leave it out for now. And Backtrack is a cool feature where you can go back at any point in time and restore from a specific point in time. We can leave that out for now. The performance insights, sure, we can, doesn't really matter here. And the monitoring we can leave as is. The logging, everything else looks like we can leave the defaults. So I think we're all set to go. And I'm going to just review it now. Everything looks okay. And I will say create the database. So it's going to take a few minutes. This is going to take a little longer than EC2 instances to bring up. So here we go. So right now it's creating it, so they're not up yet. So now it has the reader, and it has, it should have had a writer as well. So let me see here. So the main thing I wanted to show was that it's going to group it in a cluster. So this test Aurora is our cluster name, and it's going to have a reader endpoint and a writer endpoint. And if I click into it, okay, so the endpoints haven't been brought up yet. Oh, here they are. Okay, so this is the writer endpoint. So again, from our applications, we would just access this for writing, and like for the update statements, and this for the select statements or the reading. And it doesn't matter how many replicas are in that cluster. The main idea is we just access the entire cluster through these two endpoints, and then let Amazon handle the scaling within the cluster in terms of how many readers are there, where they're located, which readers, which requests are sent to which readers, and all that. We can let Aurora handle all that. Now, if you do look at the instances, you can still see that this has, it should have, like when it's finally up, it's going to have its own endpoint. So you could go into like a replica or in a specific instance and go into a specific, like that specific instance. But the way to kind of do it is to just access it through the cluster endpoints. So we're going to give it a little bit of time. I'm going to pause the video because it'll take a few minutes to come up. And let me go back to the database dashboard. Yeah, so it's still not coming up. I'm going to pause the video when this is finished, and we'll continue from there. Okay, we're back. Now the instances have been created, so the cluster is ready. So you can see here we have one cluster with one writer and one reader. And you can see here that they are in different availability zones. They're in the same region, but different availability zones. One is in 1D, one is in 1A, US East 1D, one US East 1A. And as far as accessing them, like I was saying before, you have a single writer endpoint and a reader endpoint at the cluster level. But if you go into, let's say, the writer instance, it does have its own endpoint here if you wanted to access the writer instance specifically. And the reader instance is here, which has its own reader endpoint here. But the best way would be just to use these two endpoints. This is the writer endpoint, and this is the reader endpoint, which you could see here by the type, and also this RO, which is read-only. Okay, so now that we have our cluster running, what we're going to do is we're going to create an auto-scaling policy on it to show how RDS Aurora can auto-scale out and back in. So if we select the cluster, and we could say actions, and we could say add replica auto-scaling. So we'll call this test, and we'll just say, so this is the part you can specify different metrics. You can do it based on the CPU utilization or the connections. We'll use the CPU utilization, and we'll use something really low, like we'll use 3%, and that way it'll start to scale out automatically right now because the CPUs are running around 5 or 6%. So we'll say if the CPU is above 3%, start creating more read replicas. And then you could actually say what's the minimum and maximum. So you could see here it actually could scale up to 15, which is more than for MySQL and Postgres. MySQL and Postgres could only scale out to 5. This is one of the things that Amazon is trying to encourage people to use Aurora over MySQL and Postgres, is because it can have more read replicas. So we'll just say, okay, instead of 15, we'll just say 10. And let's see, we don't need that. So if we just do this, we now should see automatically more read replicas created. In fact, we should see 10 read replicas created because I gave a pretty low threshold of 3%. So let's add this policy. Okay, now we have this policy, and where you could see this policy, it's a little bit tricky. They don't make it very obvious, but if you select your cluster and then go to logs and events, which is here, and then there's the auto scaling policy, which is right there, and you could see the target value is 3%. If we want to edit it, you can always edit it like this, but we'll leave it for now. So what we should see is if we go back to our dashboard, we should see more instances start to come up. So let's refresh this. As you can see here, the CPU is running above 3%. Here it's 6 and here it's 7. And it might take a little bit of time for the auto-scaling policy to kick in. So what I'll probably do is I'll probably pause the video again to kind of show you what it would look like after everything has kicked in and the auto-scaling starts to work. Okay, so this is now in the middle of the auto-scaling. I just wanted to show you what's happening while it's creating it. So you could see now there's 2 more readers that have been created, and you could see here it named them automatically with auto scaling and tagged them. And you could see here the same instance size, and you can't see other details right now because they're just being created right now. If we refresh, let's see if it updated it. Okay, so you see it put them in US East 1B, US East 1A. So it's putting them into different availability zones, which is what we wanted when we created that initial cluster. And it's still creating them. It's going to keep creating. To be honest, this will take a while, because again, it takes a while to create each instance. So I'm going to pause the video again and bring it back up later in the process. Okay, I wanted to just show you what's happening in the process of the auto scaling. So now we could see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5 readers that have been created from the auto scaling policy. We have 6 readers in total, which is what because we started with 1. And as you can see, some are already available, some are still being configured. And you could see here they're coming up in different availability zones, all in US East 1. And this is why I wanted to create 10, just to show you that they're going to be, they should be kind of scattered through most of the availability zones. If you look here, it's still showing as 3 zones. So it looks like it's going to, for now, it's just using 3 availability zones to create all the replicas. So we're going to pause it again and come back when there's more read replicas created. Okay, so we're back. So we have our read replicas created. So let's take a look here. So we have our writer, which is right here, and then we should have 10. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And the 10th is the original reader, and then it created 9 additional readers because we said anytime the CPU is below 3%, create a new reader. And as you can see, the CPUs are around 5, 6. This one's at 21. But it automatically scaled and created more readers based on our auto scaling policy. So what we'll do now is we will modify the auto scaling policy to scale down. And what we'll do is we will go back to our logs and events. It's kind of hard to see, but if you select your cluster, and then if you go to this logs and events, that's where you'll see the auto scaling policy, and it's right here. And we will edit it. So now what we'll do is we'll create a maximum. Let's just decrease it to 3, and we can make the target value, instead of such a low value, we'll give it a much higher value, like 50%. So now, if the CPU is above 50%, it'll scale up. But because we have 10 replicas and we set a maximum of 3 now, it should automatically start deleting all the replicas, deleting a lot of those replicas. So let's just save this. And again, it's going to take some time for it to start the deletion process and to actually do the deleting. Well, as you can see right away, so there, it started deleting these 4 replicas here. If we refresh, let me go back to the main database dashboard. So we can see it's already started 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 7 replicas it started deleting. Now it should only go back to a single read replica because we said the threshold is 50%. So it's going to be, obviously most of these the CPUs are going to be much lower than that. So let's pause the video. I'm just going to refresh it before I pause. Let's see if it did anything else. Let's pause the video and come back when it finished scaling down. Okay, we are back from the scale down process. So here's what we have left. This is all happening automatically. I didn't modify anything here. So all the read replicas, as you can see, have been deleted. And the reason is because the original reader has a CPU of only 6%, so there was no need to scale up and create read replicas. So now we could see the autoscaling policy is in place. It can scale up, it can scale down. Right now there's no need for it to scale up to anything, so we just have one reader and one writer. And what we're finally going to do is we're just going to clean up the all the instances and the autoscaling policy so we can get back to our original state. So if we go back to the cluster here, so we can now look at our autoscaling policy, which is under here, logs and events. And here it is. So well, I'm just going to delete this policy like that. So now it's gone. We can always add a new one over here. And then I'm going to delete the instances. Now, you can't delete the entire cluster here. It's not going to let you delete the cluster. So you have to delete each instance separately. So I'm going to delete the reader like this. And then it's going to ask me if I really want to delete it. So I have to say delete me. And now it's going to start deleting the reader. And then if I go to the writer, I can delete the writer like this. It's going to ask to create a final snapshot. We don't really need that. So I'll just uncheck that, and I have to acknowledge this. And then I'll say delete me. Okay, so now both the reader and the writer are being deleted. So let me go back to the dashboard for the databases. And as you can see, it's automatically saying the cluster is going to be deleted because I'm deleting everything within the cluster. The other thing you might need to do is delete snapshots. So there would be snapshots taken automatically for backups. In this case, we don't really have any snapshots, but you can easily delete them from here. And the final thing would be to delete the security group, which would be this one right here that we created. And I can just delete it like this. Okay, so it's still, yeah, because the DB instance hasn't been deleted yet, it's not allowing me to delete the security group, so I have to wait until the instances are deleted. So for now, let's just go back here, click on the database. And again, this is going to take a few minutes to do, but you get the idea that once this is deleted, we can delete the security group, and then we will be back to where we started.